your passbook with you, the other employer picks it up. You're not allowed to mortgage it, you're not allowed to cash in on it before you get to the retirement age. It's there, that's your security. Have it made up every year. You encourage people to save. You've got to encourage young people to save. Sooner or later, they're going to need that saving, and New Zealand needs the saving. That's the scheme.
Isn't that ironic that you say that, and yet that's the very criticism that the private industry levels at you for the taxation on superannuation?
But people weren't all saving. Only 1/3 were in the schemes. Many of them didn't come through. There wasn't portability in the schemes. People capitalised the tax deduction and got out, and the state still had to pick up the tab. Now, if we start from the proposition that the state cannot afford to pick up the tab and keep people in that style of life that they've been accustomed to because of other things, then they've got to look after themselves.
Minister, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Now, with the rest of the day's news, here's Angela.
And in other news, Waitemata City in West Auckland tonight passed a bylaw which will ban smoking in public places. The council is the first local body in the Southern Hemisphere to take such a drastic step against smokers. From June the 1st, people within Waitemata City limits face a fine of up to $500 for smoking in shops, lifts, banks, in special areas set aside for non-smokers in restaurants and in other public places. The bylaw came before a full council meeting tonight, presided over by Mayor Tim Shadbolt. Health authorities and anti-smoking groups backed the council's proposed bylaw, but there was strong opposition from some local retailers and from the Tobacco Institute. Petitions with the signatures of several hundred people opposing the new bylaw were presented and received at the meeting. But in spite of the dissenting views of two councillors and a move by Mayor Tim Shadbolt to delay the bylaw for further public discussion to take place, the new measure was adopted by 14 votes to 2. And later in EyeWitness News, we'll background the issue of smoking and health, and Rob will interview Waitemata City Councillor Jim Hayder about tonight's decision. A man has been arrested in Tauranga and charged with GST fraud, totalling $130,000. The 47-year-old businessman will appear in court next Tuesday. The 15 GST returns in question were allegedly filed earlier this year. Higher prices for our butter overseas could net $50 million more income for farmers, but the extra return could be affected by the strong New Zealand dollar, and there's still a lot of opposition in Europe to New Zealand's access to that butter market.
The price rise may turn out to be the sugar before the bitter pill. Brian Gardner predicts a possible slash to our European butter quota of up to 1/3.
Dairy products, of course, faces the antagonism of EEC producers because, of course, they've had their production reduced by the imposition of quotas since 1984. There have been further reductions in the quota, and therefore there is a great deal of opposition to any dairy product being imported into the community.
The Dairy Board says a slash as huge as 1/3 would be catastrophic for New Zealand. But Brian Gardner says while European governments cling to the archaic and crazy belief that they're supporting peasant farmers, the outlook for New Zealand is increasingly bleak.
The next Superpower Summit will be in Moscow from May the 29th to June the 2nd. The date was announced after a meeting between US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze in Washington. It'll be the 4th summit between Mr. Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. They pledged at their Washington meeting last December to have a strategic arms treaty ready for signing in Moscow, but today neither side indicated that an agreement would be ready. Britain's 2 television networks have handed over to police all the film taken at the IRA funeral at which 2 soldiers were killed in a mob attack. The networks had earlier refused to hand over their unused material, arguing that film crews could be endangered if they were thought to be cooperating with the security forces in Northern Ireland. Police have taken the film under Britain's anti-terrorist legislation. Meanwhile, the bodies of the 2 soldiers were today flown back to the British mainland.
The plane bringing the bodies back from Belfast touched down at a windswept RAF Northolt in the middle of a heavy rain squall. And for the first time, a British Prime Minister came to greet coffins returning from Northern Ireland. Also on the tarmac, representatives of the families. Corporal David House's parents. And standing with the Prime Minister, Corporal Derek Wood's sister and brother-in-law facing the icy wind. To Chopin's funeral march, the coffins were borne past the dead soldiers' colleagues, heads bowed, rifles reversed. Past the families, the politicians, the senior officers. Corporal Wood's family placed a small spray of flowers on his coffin. He will receive full military burial in South London. Corporal House's parents will take his body for a private burial in Northamptonshire. But before they left, Mrs. Thatcher told the relatives that the men had died showing exceptional restraint under hideous provocation. And then it was all over. The simple ceremony had lasted less than half an hour.
And thousands of people turned out in Northern Ireland for memorial services for the two men. The biggest gathering was at Belfast's Cenotaph, where the Dean of the city's Anglican Cathedral told the crowd of 10,000 that without British troops in the province, there would be chaos and anarchy. Here at home, it was a big day for Michael Fay's big boat, New Zealand, with the 30-metre Challenger for the America's Cup getting its first taste of the water on Auckland's Waitemata Harbour. New Zealand's seagoing debut started early. The official launching's not till Sunday, so spectator craft were scarce for today's low-key trial. The new sails were hoisted slowly. Each one costs tens of thousands of dollars, the mainsail being 4 times the size of KZ-7's. The seas were light today and the breeze only 4 to 5 knots, but even in such light conditions, New Zealand managed double the wind speed. The crew will now sail it every day until May, when Michael Fay's America's Cup hopeful will be shipped to San Diego. To the share market now, and a major takeover bid by Briley subsidiary today sent the Barclays index to its highest level this year. The bid was from Hong Kong-based IEP, which plans to spend $1.2 billion to buy the remaining 81% of the American building supplies company CalMet. IEP already owns 19%. It's offering $40 in cash per share and values CalMet at nearly $2 billion. The market reacted positively to this announcement, with IEP leaping 15 cents and Briley Investments, supported by offshore buying, increased 10 cents. The CalMet bid follows the combined Briley-Kerry Packer $800 million takeover offer of the Bell Resources Company in Australia. The Barclays index finished at 2,028 points, up 37. Rises included Briley up 10, IEP 15, TKM 10, Fletcher Challenge 7, Goodman Fielder 10, European Pacific 15, Chase Corporation 8 and Robert Jones 5. That's our summary of the news. I'll be back later with the headlines and tomorrow's weather.
Thanks, Angela. After the break, a report from Canberra, where our Minister of Defence, Bob Tizard, has been meeting his Australian counterpart to talk frigates. And we report from West Auckland, where a bylaw to ban smoking in public places is exercising the minds of city councillors.
Vincent knows it. Beauty and the Beast, Friday.
Welcome back. In Canberra, important talks between the Defence Ministers of Australia and New Zealand have been concentrating on the joint plan to build 12 frigates in Australian shipyards, 4 of them for New Zealand. It's an open secret that the New Zealand government is concerned about the possible cost of the ships, and today Defence Minister Bob Tizard said a firm decision on whether we go ahead with the purchases will be made in 18 months. One alternative he put forward was that New Zealand could buy 2 frigates off the shelf from a European builder. In a moment, Richard Harman reports on the talks in Canberra, but first, John Hudson examines the need for new frigates.
The Anzac ship project would replace the Navy's 4 Leander-class frigates over the next 15 years. The existing ships, the Canterbury, Waikato, Southland and Wellington, are old. The Southland was launched 27 years ago. The newest ship, the Canterbury, is 18 years old. According to the Navy, the Leanders are costly to operate and their range, about 2,500 nautical miles, is less than desirable. Last year, the Australian and New Zealand governments signed a memorandum of understanding for a joint venture to build 12 new ships in Australian dockyards. The first of New Zealand's 4 new frigates would enter service in 1994, replacing either the Waikato or the Southland. The last would arrive 10 years later. Both navies want frigates with a longer range than the Leanders, capable of at least 27 knots and of staying at sea for at least 30 days. Other characteristics included air and navigation radar, point defence missile systems, sonar, ship-launched torpedoes, combat data systems and helicopter capabilities. Naval staff considered 13 designs, then whittled that down to 2, the German MECO 200 and the Dutch M-type. However, the New Zealand government has until now only been committed to the design stages of the project and has been able to opt out of construction. Tenders for the ships were to be received by the end of this year, with production contracts signed midway through 1989. Provisions in the closer economic relations agreement would apply to the project, and New Zealand partners are included in each consortium. The Royal New Zealand Navy already has 7 officers on the project in Canberra and has plans to send 3 more. Cost estimates for the Anzac ship project have varied markedly, though. Last year, Defence Minister Bob Tizard put it at between $250 and $300 million for each frigate, but other estimates put the price much higher. One former Royal Australian Navy officer recently put the price tag at $560 million a ship, and that, he said, was without extras. Certainly there's been concern over escalating costs, and if Australian estimates are correct, the project could cost New Zealand more than twice last year's total gross defence budget of $1,100 million.
Mr Tizard arrived in Canberra yesterday for the annual ministerial defence talks. Perhaps fittingly, he began his stay with a visit to the Australian National War Memorial, which honours the Anzac legend. And the Anzac frigates obviously topped the agenda during the talks. Mr Tizard was pleased with Australian agreement to include New Zealand involvement in the construction program.
We are always better placed to spend New Zealand dollars on our program than overseas funds. Now, if the program for construction of the frigates goes the way we intend in our present discussions, and New Zealand industry has a worthwhile contribution to the scheme, that is a further guarantee that the scheme will go ahead.
But the big unknown about the frigates is cost. Mr Beasley says the Australians are budgeting $3.5 billion for 8 ships. That's about $430 million each. Mr Tizard hinted New Zealand could opt for a less sophisticated and therefore cheaper version than Australia.
But it is not, in our view, likely that there will be major war in this region in the next 20, 25 years, or even that there will be an emergency that requires really vigorous naval activity. It will be patrol, it will be surveillance, it will be work in conjunction with the civil emergencies that have come about by natural disasters. But we have to have the reserve capacity in case they are needed for something more. Now, against that background, they will be equipped.
We would probably see the frigate as a the Anzac ship as a ship that we would entail our usage in some fairly hot areas. So it would be quite logical for the Australian version to carry a great number of air defence weapons, or maybe even surface strike weapons or whatever, as we go along the way. That we're going to have some cost considerations apply to that. And New Zealand may well not see the same requirement. That won't matter. The basic ship will be the same.
The Australian Defence Department turned on a VIP welcome for Mr Tizard. New Zealand in turn has agreed to more closely integrate its jet fighter training with Australia, and the two ministers made progress in drawing up an intelligence sharing treaty between the two countries. That treaty's been made necessary because of New Zealand's decision to build a satellite interception station at Waihopai near Blenheim. Both ministers emphasised that New Zealand has not yet finally agreed to buy the 4 Anzac frigates. Mr Beasley said he's happy with New Zealand's commitment to the project so far. He refused to speculate on what would happen if New Zealand pulled out of the deal, but most political commentators here in Canberra believe that if New Zealand did not buy the ships, the Australian-New Zealand defence relationship would turn very sour. Mr Tizard will spend the next 6 days visiting Australian defence operations around the country.
As we heard earlier in the programme, Waitemata City in West Auckland tonight became the first council in the country, and possibly in the Southern Hemisphere, to ban smoking in some public places. The decision is the latest setback in a day of setbacks for smokers. Earlier on, the government announced it was banning the sale of cigarettes to under 16-year-olds. And the Health Department today published a new book, The Big Kill, which makes for grim reading about the dangers of smoking. It reports that nearly 5,000 New Zealanders die each year of smoking-related illnesses. In a moment, I'll be talking to one of the people instrumental in getting the Waitemata bylaw passed. But first, Rod Vaughan backgrounds the row.
Waitemata has become the scene of a showdown between the powerful tobacco industry and the vociferous anti-smoking lobby. And for both sides, the stakes are high. A decision to make the city smoke-free could well encourage other local bodies to follow suit. Bad news indeed for the tobacco industry. While a decision not to ban smoking could be a setback for groups committed to the anti-smoking cause. Both sides have made strong representations to the Waitemata City Council.
We have a responsibility as a city council to look after the health of our ratepayers. And so we are looking to introduce this bylaw to look after those people that are affected by smoke.
But you are effectively denying people freedom of choice.
Freedom of choice, whose freedom of choice? The non-smoker, the smoker, or the retailer? We have struck a compromise whereby we say that all parties will be satisfied by this bylaw.
The Waitemata proposal calls for a ban on smoking in the public areas of shops, banks, insurance offices and even lifts serving such premises. Each business must display a sign drawing the attention of customers to the new regulations. Failure to comply could result in a $500 fine for shopkeeper or customer. The only exceptions will be restaurants and hotels. Restaurants will only be 50% smoke-free. That is, they must set aside half their seating for non-smokers. Hotels and taverns, on the other hand, will be totally exempt. Perhaps not surprisingly, many Waitemata retailers have taken umbrage at what's happening, and several petitions have been circulating.
Our position is the high-handed attitude of the council coming in with this $500 fine if we don't put the signs up, and the fact that it is impinging on our retail viability.
A high-handed attitude? Why do you say that?
Well, they didn't approach us to see if we would like to participate in a social experiment. They haven't yet proven to me that anyone has died from passive smoking, but as a non-smoker, I basically, back the idea.
Are you going to lose business?
Yes, we certainly will. It's been proven in California that business dropped off immediately, and of course over there they eventually had to throw the bill out.
In pushing for the ban, the anti-smoking lobby has been able to draw on mounting medical evidence that smoking has become a major health hazard. Latest figures indicate that almost 5,000 New Zealanders die every year from smoking, the most common complaints being lung cancer, emphysema, bronchitis and heart disease. The cost to the nation of healthcare and lost productivity is put at $780 million a year. While the overall number of New Zealanders smoking is dropping by about 2% a year, there's little evidence of a decrease among young New Zealanders. It's thought that 60 children take up the habit every day, with 45% of 15-year-old females smoking. So, in medical circles, there's almost universal support for the Waitemata proposal.
Gives non-smokers the right to smoke-free air, to get away from cancer in the air, triggering asthma attacks, the nuisance, the burns, etc. People are fed up with having to negotiate all the time whether or not they have smoke-free air, and it gives the non-smokers their first legal rights in New Zealand.
But it is being suggested that your organisation has orchestrated this whole campaign, that it's persuaded the City Council to introduce this bylaw.
We haven't made the Waitemata City Councillors do anything. They've done it of their own free will. It's now their campaign. It originally was our idea because 400 cities in America have good bylaws that are working, that don't affect business and that are very popular. And we want that same right for non-smokers in New Zealand.
So what's happening at Waitemata has brought to a head a campaign that's been waging for some time between the tobacco industry and the anti-smoking lobby. At issue are questions of health, civil liberties, jobs, profits and the law. And it's on matters of law that the tobacco manufacturers may well argue their case. They're likely to question whether Section 684 of the Local Government Act, as applied by the Waitemata City Council, can be used to enforce a ban on smoking in public places. It's an act which is designed to conserve public health and well-being. But whether it allows New Zealand's fifth largest city to declare itself smoke-free may be challenged by an industry which could be fighting for its very survival.
We believe that this particular bylaw does interfere with the personal rights of our customers, but more importantly, I think it impinges on private property and is an invasion on the rights of retailers and business people generally to run their businesses the way they feel fit.
But surely smoking is a major health hazard. 5,000 people die from it every year.
Environmental tobacco smoke has been shown not to be a health hazard, and I believe that there is evidence in Waitemata City at the moment to show that where there should be sensible smoking restrictions, such as in food bars, petrol stations, restaurants, supermarkets, they are already there. And I think that this bylaw is trying to fix a problem in the area that doesn't need fixing.
Well, Jim Hayter, you played a prominent role in getting this bylaw passed. Do you now feel that you've had a victory?
We have had a victory of sorts, I guess, but I'm thinking mainly of the health aspect of our ratepayers in Waitemata City, and I am pleased for those people that this has been a concern to.
Do you expect this to move and spread to other city councils?
Very much so. There are other councils waiting to see the outcome of our debate this evening, and I'm sure you'll see that this, once we're through now, the floodgates will open and other councils will follow us.
Do you intend to take your message, if you like, to those other councils?
We had a seminar where a number of those councillors were present, and they are interested in how we are going, and they want details of the bylaws, so it's natural that that follows.
Did you actually have a mandate, though, from the people of the city to proceed?
It was first introduced 3.5 years ago, and not so much as a mandate, but more as a concern from a city councillor.
But did you actually ever get the people of Waitemata to say that this is what they wanted?
No, not as such, but then again there are a number of bylaws that require the same sort of initiative taken by the council. Building bylaws, hygiene bylaws regarding food preparation, those sort of initiatives are taken by the council.
But given that this was so new and likely to be controversial, why did you not seek public approval?
We have sought public approval in the month period that we had for submissions, and we received a number of submissions, and as a result of those submissions we made alterations to our proposed bylaw to accommodate concerns expressed in those submissions.
Do you expect any sort of legal challenge to this?
I don't really think so. It is very cut and dry. Our solicitors have gone over it very carefully, and I'll be very surprised if there is.
The basic objection, I suppose, is that people should have the choice, that if restaurants, for example, want to have smoke-free areas and it's in their customers' interest, they choose it, then they will choose to do so. Why the compulsion?
It's really to remove the confrontation aspect of the whole thing, whereby the owner of the restaurant can now point to a non-smoking sign and say, look, I'm sorry, there's no smoke in my restaurant as per the bylaw. And
Have there been confrontation in the past?
There is confrontation. Quite often, if someone is assertive enough to ask a smoker to put out a cigarette, the tone in which they ask is often confrontational, which creates a problem.
What about the matter of the argument over passive smoking? Does it harm or does it not? You're obviously convinced, but wouldn't you expect people to still oppose that?
Yes, but we have had information from the Surgeon General in the United States, and he specifically states in his book that it definitely does cause harm. Passive smoke does cause health problems.
Jim Hayter, thank you.
Thank you.
After the break, it's World Watch. Tonight, we look at the Superpower Summit, the prospects there, the guerrilla war in Afghanistan and Northern Ireland, and the chilling alternative to a nuclear conflict, victims of chemical warfare in the Gulf conflict.
Welcome to World Watch. As we heard in the news, a date has now been set for a US-Soviet summit in Moscow. It'll be held over 5 days from the end of May, and will be the fourth such meeting between Mr. Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev. The timing of today's announcement may be significant, coming as it does exactly 5 years after the American president first proposed a Star Wars defense system, which has been the stumbling block of summits past. David Shookman and Mike McMillan examined Star Wars and treaty verification, two outstanding issues on the agenda for Moscow.
This was President Reagan's dream, a system of defenses against Soviet missiles, a shield in space making nuclear weapons obsolete.
What if free people could live secure in the knowledge But their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies.
5 years and $11 billion later, that objective appears to have changed. No longer impregnable protection for a whole nation, now the layered defense system has more limited aims. Nevertheless, it's the issue which derailed the Reykjavik summit, the Soviets refusing to cut their missiles till Reagan agreed to limit his plan. At the last summit, they found a compromise, but only by leaving unresolved the issues of whether and how to restrict the project. The Russians in any case know the next American president may not be as determined about Star Wars as Reagan. Lasers, meanwhile, remain the long-term hope. But as much money is now going on weapons already on the shelf. Among those in the Pentagon's eye are Starstreak missiles from Shorts in Belfast. Unusually quick and highly accurate. The priority for many in Washington is to get some defenses in place to match those admitted by the Russians.
This will be the destruction process. In Utah, the Americans blow up a Pershing missile. The Soviets are about to send a delegation here, which will be billeted at this base for 13 years to check that the deal is being adhered to. In Russia, American teams will do the same. But before any of that can happen, the US Senate ponders the paperwork and must ratify the agreement. It could well do so before the Moscow summit. But it shows just how tedious the process is and does not augur well for the nuts and bolts of that summit. The proposed halving of intercontinental ballistic missiles like the MX and the B-1 bomber. That is the goal, but the American Senate has already voiced its concern about Soviet cheating, since neither side is proposing that long-range missiles be totally eliminated.
The authorities in Moscow made no direct mention of the superpower summit today. A meeting of the Supreme Soviet concentrated instead on problems of racial unrest in Soviet Armenia and Azerbaijan. As Brian Hanrahan reports, on that issue at least, a hawkish mood prevails in the Kremlin.
The Kremlin is serving notice that it will crack down if demonstrations continue in Armenia. Today's statement says attempts to pressure the state authorities are intolerable and calls for necessary measures to restore order. It also signals that Moscow does not intend to redraw the boundaries of Armenia. It harshly condemns those pressing for change as self-styled formations. The dismissive words are at odds with the evidence that the demonstrations in Armenia are broadly based and enjoy mass support. At one point, it's estimated 1 million people, around a third of the population, joined in. They stopped to allow the Kremlin and Mr. Gorbachev himself a month's grace to consider the problem. But the month is up on Saturday, and their demands are unsatisfied. For Mr. Gorbachev, grumbling again today about the pace of reform, the demonstrations represent the trickiest problem of his 3 years in office. He must consider how tough he can be without destroying the bases for his policies of greater openness and democracy.
One issue which has seen some progress over the course of the Reagan-Gorbachev dialogue has been Afghanistan. The Soviet Union is now committed to a withdrawal, although getting out raises almost as many problems as continuing the war. The Afghan guerrilla movement, which has been so successful in making the war too costly for Moscow, could drive this country on Russia's doorstep to civil war once Soviet forces leave. ITN's Sandy Gall, who is in Afghanistan, has been watching the Soviet presence through the rebels' eyes.
A Russian tank sweeping for Mujahideen mines on the road from Kabul to Gardez. The Russians are reported to have already started making preparations to withdraw from their bases in the south of Afghanistan near the Pakistani border. These are the bases with the longest lines of communication, and the convoys supplying them are always liable to ambush. In Kabul itself, despite tight security, Mujahideen assassination and bomb squads regularly get through the defensive ring and attack the large Soviet garrison. Here, in rare pictures taken by a Mujahideen group operating in Kabul, a Soviet jeep is ambushed close to the big base. As the jeep goes past, a man on the left of picture steps forward, raises a gun and fires. As he runs away, a yellow car pulls over and several men get out. They pretend to offer assistance, but are in fact Mujahideen. Here it is again in slow motion. As the jeep heads for the base, a man on the left steps into the road, brings up a gun and fires. The Mujahideen say they killed all 4 occupants, a general, 2 bodyguards and the driver. All winter, the Mujahideen have been pushing arms across the border, worried that a settlement in Geneva will bring a cut-off. If that happens, and especially if no more Stingers, the American Wonder missiles, arrive in their wooden boxes, Mujahideen morale and prospects will fall. Although not so effective, British-made blowpipes, complete with NATO serial numbers, will also stop. Stinger is said to have shot down 227 Soviet jets and helicopters last year, although this one missed. The Pakistanis and their president, General Zia, believe Stinger has forced the Russians to withdraw.
The withdrawal of the Soviet Union from Afghanistan is not in doubt. We are quite certain that they want to withdraw.
But they may wish to leave a communist government in power behind them.
Yes, this is what is not clear. From what it seems that Soviet Union, and I'll be very forthright in saying, they do not want to see the demise of a government which was created by them, supported by them. And this can be understandable. But at the same time, from the signals that we receive, that they will not mind this government to be toppled over by the Afghans themselves after they have left.
You trust Mr. Gorbachev?
I think, yes, we can trust him, yes.
The Russians say they're determined to withdraw, but they may very possibly leave a civil war behind them.
And there's no sign of an end to the Gulf War as well, nor even a let-up. Iranian gunboats today attacked a Cypriot tanker in the Straits of Hormuz, while Tehran renewed charges that Iraq is resorting to chemical warfare. Indeed, as the superpowers prepare for another attempt at limiting the world's nuclear capability for self-destruction, events in the Gulf pose a chilling alternative.
Kurdish men, women and children in the Iraqi town of Halabja subjected to an attack with mustard gas and cyanide by Iraq itself. ABC's Mike Lee describes the scene.
Most of these victims didn't have time to hide. Even those who found shelter died when the gas seeped through their doors. There were reports that in a nearby neighborhood, 2 babies were later found alive, but most children died in the arms of their parents or grandparents. Iran says Iraqi mustard gas was also deployed this past week in the region of Halabja, where the cyanide attack occurred. These are some of those mustard gas victims being treated by Iranian doctors and nurses. They are in constant agony. Mustard gas can enter through the skin or the lungs. At first, it may seem like only a minor rash, but mustard gas lingers in the system and progressively destroys more and more tissue. It can burn the lungs until the victim eventually suffocates.
20 years ago, only about 5 nations were armed with chemical weapons. Now the figure approaches 20, including several third world countries, while many others are trying to acquire such weapons or the ability to make them.
I consider it a poor man's weapon of mass destruction. This is a poor country's device that could be similar in effect to a nuclear device.
The reason is that chemical weapons are easy and relatively cheap to make, while violations of any ban are tough if not impossible to catch. And if relatively poor nations can afford chemical weapons, can violent political movements be far behind?
If the proliferation problem gets worse, we're likely to see chemical weapons fall into the hands of terrorists and used against targets of the United States or its allies in ways that would be very damaging.
Iraq, according to a United Nations investigation, has used chemical weapons repeatedly in its war with Iran, most recently to punish Kurdish civilians, before that to prevent Iranian troops from massing for attack. Preventing the manufacture of chemical weapons may be both a moral imperative